Amidst the bloody conquest of the Aztec people in present-day Mexico, the renowned explorer and conqueror Cortez wrote of a strange red fruit used by the Aztecs, which was unlike any other fruit from the Old World. As was the precedent of the time for European invaders, the use of this strange plant within its aboriginal context would go largely ignored, Cortez and his men quickly dismissing the foodstuffs of such a savage, uncivilized culture. Yet, in the interest of the Spanish posterity, Cortez was duty-bound to bring back examples of these exotic plants and place them before the royal crown. Before leaving, he would also take with him a similarly shaped plant, but smaller, and one ranging in color from hues of green and yellow to a deep purple. Regarding the latter of these two plants, the most important Spanish doctor of the crown, one Francisco Hernandez, would note his own repulsion towards the foreign item, describing how its husk dried and split, evoking images of a female genitalia with a venereal and lascivious appearance. And thus the tomatillos brought back by Cortez were largely forgotten until more modern times. And not until 1544 would an Italian come into contact with either of the two strange foods which had been brought back from the New World. The first to record doing so, a famous court physician by the name of Pietro Andrea Mattioli, would have naught to say in favor of the two foreign plants. Unfortunately for the strange red fruit, it would receive a far harsher reception than even that of the tomatillo. Noted in his Discorso della Medicina Materiale, Mattioli describes that while the red plant might indeed have been edible, it was likely a close relative to the well-studied eggplant from the Middle East. This was an unfortunate comparison for the pomodoro, or the golden fruit, whose name first appears in his writings. During this time in Renaissance Italy, the dietary understanding of foods was completely regulated and determined by the Galenic system, an ancient medicinal system developed by the Greek philosopher Hippocrates. In the system, foods were attributed one of four humors which directly influenced the temperament and health of the individual who ate them. It is fortuitous indeed, then, that when encountering for the first time one of these red fruits in 1548, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, Cosimo Medici, abstained from eating one. Had he done so, he would have experienced the similar ill effects that were attributed to the consumption of eggplants, which the Venetian botanist Pietro Antonio Michiel said were, quote, harmful to the head, generating melancholic humors, cankers, leprosy, oppilations, long-lasting fevers, and sickly color. Of its red twin, Michiel wrote of a fruit which was, quote, dangerous and harmful, their odor alone bringing about eye diseases and headaches. He went on to cite how, if eaten, they would petrify within the body, causing a further myriad of ill effects. The red produce, which the Aztecs had called a tomatal, was also attributed to be closely related to the nightshade family, known to contain potent magical and hallucinatory powers. Now, while all of these quasi-scientific claims must seem to have missed the mark on Italy's now quintessential pomodoro, or tomato, it's important to view the introduction of this new fruit in the context with which initial Italians must have also viewed it. One plausible explanation to analyze the reason such exotic and unstudied foreign plants were brought back to Europe in the first place. Perhaps, strangely to us, oftentimes the reason had nothing to do with the idea of plants' future cultivation and consumption. Rather, the more common goal was simply to discover if the plant contained any medicinal properties which could be later exploited. This makes further sense when we examine the lucrative market for curatives and life-preserving medicines at the time, which the nobility and affluent of Italy seemed to highly covet. The fact that their eagerness to spend exorbitant sums on experimental medicines was only matched by their stubbornness to moderate their overly decadent and gluttonous lifestyles, and this never seems to have been questioned. By this reasoning, it's no mystery that there wasn't a line of volunteers waiting to taste these new foods, but instead they viewed them suspiciously as likely to be poisonous and cause of all sorts of undesirable maladies. These suspicions, in combination with archaic food traditions, left Italians with little incentive to try new foods like the tomato. And so we can say the tomato received a less than lukewarm reception as it entered the Old World. A daunting mix of fear and contempt left few Italians who would try this golden fruit. One Paduan physician by the name of Giovanni Domenico Sala, who wrote on tomatoes and eggplants in 1628, went so far as to place his description of them immediately following a discussion on, quote, locust eating in Ethiopia, spider and cricket eating in Padua, and ants and worm eating in India, highlighting the suspicion in which tomatoes continue to be held even 100 years after their initial debut in Italy. Perhaps even more comical than some of the deleterious effects attributed to tomatoes were its reported medicinal uses, such as Hernandez's suggestion that they could be used to remedy eye ulcers, eye tumors, stomach, and throat inflammation, the very same symptoms which others cited as caused by tomatoes. John Ray of England, a naturalist and theologian, suggested frying them in oil and then rubbing them on the skin as an effective remedy for scabies, a common skin complaint at the time, to take advantage of their cooling and moistening effects. Somehow his home remedy never quite caught on. Given this wealth of misinformation, it's truly amazing anyone even mustered the courage to try one of these little red sacks of supposed poison and pestilence, since Europeans had refused to observe and take note of the various ways that the Aztecs had used them, as in the practice of crushing them with spices to make a versatile paste, or finely dicing them and mixing them with chilies and other vegetables to create a salsa, the Italians and Europe in general was left to discover the culinary use of tomatoes for themselves. The rare few who did venture to try one were often the targets of ridicule and condemnation, especially if belonging to the upper-class portions of society. Of Prince Francesco de' Medici, Cosimo's son, his physician noted how he foolishly consumed all manner of unsuitable foods for a man of his position, eating, quote, gross and trivial foods hard to digest, like garlic with black pepper, onions, leeks, shallots, wild garlic, strong raw onions, wild radishes, horseradish, rampions, artichokes, cardoons, artichoke shoots, celery, arugula, nasturtiums, chestnuts, truffles, and in vast quantities every kind of cheese. These now indispensable foods fare no better outside Italy, where the other European countries they were met openly with contempt and scorn, as in 1669, when an Englishwoman took her French husband to court because he had allegedly deprived her of a weekly ration of meat. It seems as if all of Europe had blacklisted these foods, including the tomato. This class distinction seems to indicate that, while most members of the nobility and upper echelons of society in Italy abstained from eating foods like tomatoes, the poor peasants of the country weren't nearly so fickle. And this again makes sense, given the context of the time. If you were a rural peasant living during the Renaissance, you would barely be able to scrape together enough food to live on a strictly subsistence diet, one in which every available foodstuff was utilized. They say hunger is the best cook, and in this case, the peasants lived in a perpetual state of hunger, making the eating habits of fruits and vegetables much more easy to hold down. In order to explain how such eating habits didn't cause their working class to kneel over and die, the nobility were quick to attribute the peasant lifestyle as one conducive to the eating of such lowly foods. One of the most popular so-called health and hygiene books of the Renaissance, celebrated physician Tomasi Ragnone of Ravenna, noted how such foods were, quote, only suitable for rustics and laborers, who alone had the bodily heat necessary to counter their cold and moist qualities and strong stomachs to digest them. So what changed between the tomato-fear times of the Renaissance and present-day Italy? Well, there are a number of probable reasons that the tomato was able to rise to prominence, ranging from advancements in scientific thinking, changes in cultural values, and even a growing variety of sweeter and less stringent tomatoes available than the ones that had been brought back by Cortez. Whichever reason one chooses to explain their growing popularity, or a combination of them, after the 18th century, they were no longer blindly feared as harbingers of fatal illnesses, and by the 19th century, they had even won their way into several Italian cookbooks, like Chef Vincenzo Corrado's Del Cibo Pitagorico Overe Herbaceo, a book detailing the cooking of vegetables. Somewhat ironically, the Italians' eventual acceptance of the tomato came years before other European countries, most notably England, who for years afterwards would mock the vegetable and fruit-loving Italians. In one print by English caricaturist Isaac Cruikshank, he would mock the Italians for their dietary customs, accompanying his print with a charming song, which would become a favorite in English coffee houses. With penny, oh, he will buy any, if it have a dandelioni, saladini, bitrutini, endivini, celerini, napkinini, swingadini.